Welcome to GONKCAST, an Autechre podcast. I'm Gabe.
I'm Dan.
And this is another bonus episode about your emails. We had to skip our last bonus episode, so we've got a nice big backlog of emails to get to today. But we're also going to spend some time discussing the 2008 Autechre live set recently reconstructed by We Are the Music Makers users iOS and Digit. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, we're going to explain everything in just a minute, and trust me, you want to hear this. First, though, I want to say thank you to everyone who's written in over the past few weeks. Even if it takes me a while to respond, I read everything right away and with great excitement, so do keep them coming. GONKCASTpod@gmail.com. Our next episode will be on oversteps and move of 10, and we really haven't heard from too many of you yet, so send us your thoughts. Again, that's GONKCASTpod@gmail.com. Contact info is in the show notes, and be sure to leave us a 5-star rate and review while you're there. Okay, Dan, why don't you explain what this live set reconstruction is for anyone out of the loop?
Yeah, back in 2018, Autechre randomly added the system files for their 2008 tour to their online store. There was no announcement about this, and the free download links were quite hidden. When the dedicated AE fans on the We Are the Music Makers forums found them, they realized all these celebrated live sets could be heard in soundboard quality for the first time if only somebody had the right gear, that being Electron's Mono Machine and Machine Drum, the Nord Modular G2 and MPC 1000, as well as a lot of patience. In stepped two users, iOS and Digit, who spent 2 years getting every little detail right using a crowd bootleg of Autechre's April 4th set at the LA Echoplex as their guide, and in December of 2020, they finally finished and shared their hard work with Autechre's fans everywhere. You'll find the link in the show notes of the episode.
Yeah, let's start with the set itself. What did you think of it in this gloriously perfect quality?
Well, I mean, when I saw that they were doing this, I didn't really have high hope. It being a fan thing, I didn't think it was going to be anything, too awesome. But damn, it's it's really, really great.
Yeah, I mean, but like the music itself. I mean, what do you think of this set? I know that this, like, is particularly this show at the Echoplex is, the bootleg is pretty celebrated as kind of a classic AE bootleg.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
I mean, it sounds like a ton of fun. I think I've mentioned it before. I went to one of the Autechre shows, one of the ones that's in the AE Live sets, and it was like, I enjoyed it a lot, but it wasn't like no one was dancing. It wasn't like an upbeat kind of thing. But this sounds like it would be, it seems like something like very fun to dance and move around to, but also, I mean, still crazy and like experimental in that, Autechre kind of way. It's like a perfect mix of the Quaristus era and like being in a club, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's funny, actually, I'm always reading the Ask Autechre Anything from 2013. I'm going to be real sad when we go beyond that and it's no longer relevant. But I'm always reading it, and I've noticed that like there are a lot of little comments and jokes about how Americans don't dance to Autechre, but I guess UK fans do. And they're like always giving these little snide remarks about like, I don't know why the fuck Americans don't dance, but they just don't. So I don't know what the deal is. It's still hard for me to imagine dancing to the AE live sets. But you're right. This one is like, it's a lot of fun. I mean, what was interesting to me is that, I kind of wanted to ask you, like, what do you think they're doing with the Quaristus sound? Since, as we were saying, it's like their live sets are always this kind of look at them, moving towards something. Usually, it's like the thing that fills in the gaps between these big changes. But I was surprised to hear that it really sounds like Quaristus. It's like, what I'm saying? It's like not like a wild departure. It's like them jamming and like making this delightfully fun live set out of the Quaristus sounds.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because you're right. The other live stuff I've heard, the AE Live and everything, none of it really like sounds exactly like, whatever album just came out or that era. But this kind of does it. It really just sounds like jamming with those, I don't want to say presets, but sort of like the presets of the Quaristus album or the instruments or layouts, whatever, of that time period.
Yeah, and it doesn't like tell us, I think, anything about oversteps. There's no hint whatsoever. And it's so weird, right? Because Quaristus was already like them jamming off of the ideas of Untilted. So now that they're jamming off of the ideas of Chorustis, we are like several steps.
It's very meta.
Yeah, it is. But, I mean, what's interesting also is that it sort of lacks, so on one hand, I want to say that Chorustis has this kind of exploratory vibe that we talked about. And, we talked about how in the original album, they're pretty succinct, short little pieces, but it's still kind of like the whole project has this kind of searching quality. And obviously you hear a lot more of that in the versions and the Quadrange EP. I mean, this live set, it sounds incredibly deliberate. Like it is just like a rush to me the whole time. And it feels like it's driving like very deliberately just forward. It's never like pausing to search little, like, cause AE Live is always like kind of, oh, let's like, what's in this room over here? Like what's in this corner? But this is just like, let's go.
Exactly. Yeah.
And another thing that's weird to me is that Chorustis has this kind of, we talked about it, like how it sounds like it's in a cave or something. It's like it's sort of distant. Like you're sort of straining your ears to hear all the little details in this like very lush murk. And the live set is like, it's missing that. You know what I mean? It's like sort of like bold and clear. You're hearing Chorustis better than you do on the actual album.
Yeah. I wonder, is that just a relic of the way this is put together? Because, if you were there in the crowd, obviously you'd hear the sound of the room, the reverb of that room and all. And the actual like room recording bootleg of the show is sort of bad quality. So it's hard to like tell that. So yeah. I wonder, is it just like the soundboard, sort of nature of this, you think?
Well, I don't know, because, I assume that, well, I guess what we didn't even really talk about this directly, but part of the Chorustis project is that they were just jamming and recording. And they talk about how they couldn't manipulate the recordings. Like they just were what they were. They were stereo recordings and you couldn't change anything about it, which was sort of different from their usual process and their process to come, where you could like mess with anything you want and like rearrange, even if it was originally jammed. This was just the stereo recordings, and you can cut them, you can edit them, you can splice them, but that's it, right? So, there's something about that process that it does have sort of like a rougher, like murkiness to it that I actually really dig, like a straight to tape kind of quality.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting in the live set. And of course, we're talking about this like crystal clear reconstruction, but it's just interesting how I feel like I'm hearing sounds from Chorustis, and there are parts that are just straight up, they're sort of jamming on actual Chorustis tracks, but I'm hearing them better than I ever heard them before. Yeah,
I get you. And you mentioned, hearing like actual little snippets of Chorustis. That's really neat too. I think people have found that there's little snippets from like NTS and stuff in, or maybe LSEC, like in the AE Live, but I mean, those are just like so giant that it's hard to like, you have to really be listening for, to find those. But here it's like very, sort of obvious when it happens. And it's really cool because can't really think of a time I've heard Autechre like play a song live that you know what I mean?
Yeah, at least not like since like the Incunabula days or whatever.
Yeah.
So I mean, just in summary on that point, I think this set is absolutely fantastic, and it's even better in this reconstruction, which I want to sort of talk about for a second. Now, I mean, what do you make of this whole insane recreation process? I don't know if I have much more to say beyond holy shit, but still.
Yeah, I mean, it's like really amazing. I don't go on that forum, I'm aware of it, but I don't ever go on it. I wonder, I would really like to know exactly like what they did. I'd like to hear from these two people, what the exact process is, because I honestly I don't know. Like, did they have to replay what's on the on that bootleg, or and just the sounds are in these files? Because I downloaded those files, but I don't own any of those machines, so I can't open it. So I don't know what's in them. You know what I mean? Like is it the MIDI files? Playing it? I like honestly don't understand it whatsoever. That's why. That's why I thought going into it that it was basically just going to be like someone taking, the sounds of that tour and then like, making a live set of their kind of own, which didn't sound like that interesting of an idea. But I mean, this is like, you know, if you listen to the actual recording of that show, like this is like 100% the show you're listening to, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about it to speak to, but we had a listener sort of explain a little bit more detail, and then I was like perusing this. There's like a million pages on this thread where this whole process was like ongoing that I sort of skimmed through. And it just seems like stuff on the Electron machines, you know, you're getting sequence data in addition to all the sound design data and stuff. So that was like really quick and easy to do. But then there are like modular components that were quite hard and I think required like, you know, listening and following. And, you know, that took like years of this like process. So, you know, I think it's just like remarkable how close they get, how exact they get actually. And on that note, I kind of wanted to ask like a philosophical question here. Is this a cover or what is this?
I don't know. I was thinking about that, you know, throughout the week listening to this. And, you know, I almost want to say yeah, but it's also, I mean, like if they are getting like the sequence data and, you know, it's the actual sound files, I mean, it basically, you know, what's the difference in like listening to a recording of an Autechre song or like using those exact machines that they're using and having the, you know, the sequencing files play the song? You know what I mean? Like, is that really just because, you know, Sean and Rob aren't in the room anymore? Like, does that make it a cover or what? I don't know. I think it is a philosophical question that's difficult, you know?
It's hard to think about, but I mean, it just is like, it feels like something closer than listening to a cover. Like it feels like,
definitely.
You know, because basically I was originally thinking like, oh, that's kind of fun. And, you know, that'll be fun to check out. But as I was listening to it, I was like, I mean, this sounds like, what would I complain about? Like, it sounds exactly like if you told me that it was a soundboard, I wouldn't have any.
No, it sounds exactly like the AE Live recording. You know, like it sounds just like them. I mean, really, yeah. If I just downloaded this as a live album, I would just think it's a soundboard. I honestly, there's nothing in it that like. I mean, to be honest, it's like one of the best, you know, live albums I've heard. You know, it's nuts.
It just sounds so good, and it's like it's basically like Rob and Sean playing, but you just get to hear it in a closer way. I mean, it's just like it's interesting to think about, but it just at the end of the day, it's just like awesome to listen to. I want to sort of end just by asking, why do you think Autechre made these files available in the first place? Like, does it tell you anything about Autechre?
I mean, maybe they wanted someone to do this. Maybe it's just, you know, people are, I'm sure, constantly when they play shows live and stuff, I'm sure people are just constantly asking them, like, how do you do that? You know, what equipment, all this. And so, like, maybe it's like, oh, you know, we've got this show that's 10 years old or whatever. Why not, like, give them the files and let them fuck around? Because really, what are the odds that, like, somebody will have access to, all of those machines that were necessary? You know, like you might own one or two or something, but not a ton of people are going to have all, you know, 4 or 5 of those things like readily available.
Yeah, I don't know. I just found myself like wondering, like, what was their goal here? And I mean, it must have been that they thought people would try to do it and that they would have fun playing with it or something. But that, you know, they might have even thought, well, people will pool resources and try to recreate this. And like, is this just the most roundabout way to release a live album possible?
I mean, maybe. I you know, it's definitely like the most, you know, digital Autechre sort of way to release a live album. But I mean, you know what I was thinking too? Like maybe they meant it in a, you know, remix kind of way. Like, you know, some artists and stuff, like Death Grips released like all the stems, you know, for their first album and stuff, and encouraged like remixes. Like maybe it was like sort of Autechre's way to do that, except it's in such like a weird way. Cause like I downloaded the files and I own a different Electron machine, and I thought, you know, maybe I could open some of them or something, but nope, can't. They're just useless sitting on my hard drive.
Yeah, I think you can do it digitally, but I also don't know enough about that.
Yeah, me neither.
You know, recreations, but you know, it's just interesting that the Quartz's project is so about process, as we discussed, and then this just caps it off in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, that's
this
a good point.
Also, like this weird art project about process and recreation. What is a cover? All that shit. I mean,
yeah, a process live album. That's pretty cool.
God damn, mind blown.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I guess we can move on to the emails then. And let's start with some choruses questions. Listener Joe wrote, "It sounds like BNC Castle exists purely to troll people who say that Autechre just sounds like a bunch of random computer noise. I remember on one of your previous episodes, someone wrote in about Autechre's sense of humor, and I think it's apparent here more than anywhere else. Also, the fact that they have tracks called No 2, No 4, and No 2 2 is hilarious." We keep circling back to this, but do you hear any of that sense of humor on Chorustus?
I don't think something like BNC is just like, quote unquote, to troll somebody. I don't think that, like, I think people who would say to Autechre, like, it's just computer noise, I feel like those are people they would just sort of be like, they don't get it and move on. I mean, obviously, like, No 2, No 4, No 2 2 is like kind of a joke, and that's pretty hilarious. But I feel like they wouldn't make a song just as like, let's fuck with people who don't listen to Autechre anyways,
Yeah. I mean, just on like a bigger level, I feel like that track is kind of funny. Like, it's absolutely absurd and like,
no, yeah, I agree with that.
Ridiculousness. So I do kind of hear that. Maybe not. I feel like Untilted is kind of funny. We talked about how like zany and cartoony it can sound at points.
Yeah.
That to me would be like Autechre's comedy album, but this one has maybe a couple comedy moments. I do think it's kind of a troll though that they called versions because they're all versions.
Yeah,
Like,
I agree there.
Everything is versions of each other, and we even like stumbled over this the whole last episode of like trying to talk about it is hard because like versions is versions of quadrants.
Yeah,
Quadrants
exactly.
is versions of versions.
It's very confusing.
Yeah, I feel like that might have been deliberate. On a similar note, listener Anton writes, "I am 99.9% sure Autechre sampled the YouTube classic Keyboard Cat for the song Full 3. The clapping sound that is happening at the start of the song is that beat clapping before the cat starts playing. One argument I have for it is that the video is just half a year older than Chorus's. I don't think this is a coincidence. And to be honest, if you were Autechre, wouldn't you just hide jokes in your songs? What do you think about this bold theory?"
I spent longer than I care to admit earlier today. I watched the Keyboard Cat video, which I hadn't seen in years.
First time in a long
first time in a long time. Still funny though. And then listen to Full 3 and. Damn, I think he might be right. Like it's that like little, I don't know if it's like supposed to be a snare or a clap, but like it almost is the same.
Yeah.
If it's not a sample of that video, I think it's using the same drum machine because it's pretty goddamn close.
I mean, there's like people make jokes, right? Like people were joking about God, I can't remember what it's called now, but the like the track on Plus that has like the clear 808 bell sound. Mm-hmm. And they were jokes like they made it in Max MSP, so it's okay. Just because they happen to design a sound that sounds exactly like. And the thing is, like, the Keyboard Cat is just using like a standard metronome kind of a beat on whatever shitty keyboard this is, and so maybe they designed like a snare sound. They did so much meticulous, sound design that they ended up going full circle and back at classic like shitty metronome keyboard sound.
Yeah, just like a Casio generic beat. Yeah,
but I'll be damned if it doesn't. If it really doesn't sound like it. I also never appreciated how like brutally lo-fi the Keyboard Cat video is. Like it actually sounds kind of awesome. That beat.
It really is. I hadn't seen it in so long, and I think it's a really old video. Like it was old before it was on YouTube. I think it's great. Love a good cat video.
All right, what's next?
All right, another one from listener Joe. When I said that I would love to ask Autechre if they were to do Chorustus again, if they would do a longer XI LSEC style release, I wasn't talking about releasing it as one massive blob of music and calling it an album. What I meant was if they were to do it over again, would they make a 2 to 3 hour album so that included some of the longer versions, for example, IO Mons instead of the original IO, and Chinksy 9X, and have something like a 30-minute version of Parlance that goes through all the different crazy sections that we hear on the various tracks across the all different releases. It seems like they were still pressured to fit on a CD and might have done things differently if they hadn't felt the pressure. But then again, maybe they were totally satisfied with the Chorustus project as a whole and wouldn't have felt the desire to do it any differently.
Yeah, this is interesting. I guess I did sort of misinterpret Joe here. That I thought he was because we talked about this on the last episode. Like, would they have just released it all at once?
Yeah,
but it does seem like they made decisions that would make this whole thing fit on a disc. Obviously, right? I mean, it almost fills up the whole disc, and yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard to it's hard to imagine like today that they wouldn't give us some longer jams. Maybe even if the project was supposed to be a bunch of short little things, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I misinterpreted him during the episode too, but yeah, I think he makes a good point, because you're right. I mean, 2008, you still basically had to release things physically. Spotify didn't exist or anything, and digital downloads were in their infancy. But yeah, I mean, today I think that's exactly what LSEC is. It doesn't fit on a CD. It was never released physically, like in any sort of format. NTS, weirdly, what was released on vinyl, but I think I could see maybe them switching some of the quad range things around, or even some of the stuff on versions, if they weren't limited by that what is it, 80 minutes or 90 minutes of 80, CD 80, yeah. I think definitely that they're in 2008 everyone was limited by that.
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly disrupt the flow to have a 30-minute track in the middle of there, and it would change a lot about the identity of the album if you did have like really wildly different song lengths. But I started thinking like, well, maybe they would have done, if that was important to them, they could have done like 40 tracks, and then like some of these other little snippets might have appeared as their own tracks elsewhere if they weren't limited in that way. Here's one more from listener Joe, who says, speaking of the Choruses project as a whole, the question of whether to consider it as a separate release or as one large thing is a very tricky one. On one hand, if you were to do that, then would you need to consider En Vain and Sickly Sweet part of Chiastic Slide, or Try Repete plus the true version of the album? On the other hand, I feel like it's a lot more justifiable to consider this all one project, specifically because the other releases are called Choruses Versions and Choruses Quadrange, EP, AE. It seems like these are meant to be considered part of the same package far more than other albums and related EPs might be. What do you think about that?
He's got a decent point, especially with Try Repete, plus. But I think the fact that the word choristus is in each one of these releases, does sync them together much more. I think with Try Repete plus, Anvil Vapor and Garbage are fairly different from each other and from Try Repete. It was just America that plus was released in. I think it was just sort of a way to release it here, maybe not even their idea. Sickly Sweet, En Vain, I think that's maybe closer to being a choruses sort of thing, especially like Sickly Sweet sort of references a song on Chiastic and all, but I think definitely choruses, it's much more of a gray area, because we've not only are the titles all the same, but I mean there's that word again, versions of different songs throughout those three things. You're getting many versions of the same track and stuff, which makes it much harder to separate.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. It just seems like usually Autechre's EPs are just different paths, totally, to me. They just sound they're different ideas and directions, really usually unified in some way. Whereas I don't think you could listen to Choruses Versions and be like, this is so clearly different with its own unique identity from Choruses. And again, I do think the title, sort of encourages you to do that. Not to mention, in some of the quotes we read in the Ask Autechre or Anything, where they're sort of saying, go ahead, make your own playlists and stuff. That's kind of what we were shooting for. All right, what's next?
All right, listener David, he says, Choristus is not a weak album by any means, with more great material to come, but ended what for me would be their imperial phrase, which was the high bar that ran from Try Repete through Untilted. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. I guess he means.
Oh yeah, phase. Yeah, that's what made me stumble.
Yeah, I just sort of copied it directly, but I kept thinking about this term, imperial phase, and it's interesting because if I had to pick, I don't know fully what that means, imperial phase, but for some reason I have some sense of okay, if I had to choose an Autechre imperial phase, I would probably not go as far as Untilted, but I would probably say that like kind of tri-repete through Confield era. Do you have any sense of like what you would like, how you would define Imperial phase and what it would be?
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult because I think we've been talking about like this being like the middle period and all. So I think there's definitely like, different phases, but Imperial phase, I guess, it implies their best time. And, I don't want to spoil anything, but I kind of think we're living in the, the best time now. And also, I don't know what
I was interpreting it differently, like not like best, but just like their world takeover, like their domination period or something like that.
Okay.
And it feels to me like the stuff they're doing now is like for them, like they're just kind of like doing whatever the fuck they want, and they don't even care if anybody likes it. They're so established that they can just kind of like chase whatever they want. But there was like this time in the 90s where they were maybe like deliberately trying to change the face of electronic music or something like that, and it was sort of a takeover stage,
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, more. Yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm tempted to even say, maybe Amber through, I don't know, Confield or something, yeah.
Yeah, just seems like they're not interested anymore in, like, what's going on in popular music or like, even speaking to that or having an effect on it.
Yeah.
On a slightly related note, listener Sean writes, I would have to strongly disagree with Dan's point on the Untilted episode that you could potentially group Chorustus in as a quadrilogy with Confield, Draft, and Untilted. Now that we sort of did the deep dive on Chorustus, do you think a little differently about that?
Did I say that? I don't remember.
Yeah, just that like you sort of grouped it in with the middle period, like these are the middle period albums.
Yeah, I think we touched on it very slightly on the last episode, but yeah, I think that Chorustus is sort of the like, it's sort of like a in between period, in between the middle and in between the current contemporary period of Autechre. I never really meant it as like a quadrilogy, which I think like implies that there's something similar about all those. I just sort of meant it as like this is part of the period, but I think after spending so much time with the whole, Chorustus extended universe that it is hard to group in with that middle period, and it's definitely like making a change into another era. As I've been spending, time with Oversteps and Move of 10, I think it's sort of like breaking me from that more. We'll get to it more next episode, but I sort of I don't know if I think that that's the middle period anymore, but I'm not sure where I would put it. I think it's maybe sort of a floating, in between. Yeah,
it kind of is, but it's also like, it feels to me much more like a sign of things to come than connected to this, but it doesn't fit exactly right. I think the next email is on a similar topic, so why don't you read that?
Yeah, this comes from listener Stylus. He said, I think there's a tendency among fans to view the 3 albums that follow Confield as less impactful extensions of it, which is a real shame. While I do think that applies to Draft 730 to an extent, I feel that Untilted and Chorustus stand perfectly alone from the Confield wave, or whatever you might call it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, it's just like, I don't know. I can't even make up my mind. Does it seem to you like Draft and Untilted, because you're a little less hot on them than I am, are kind of just in the shadow of Confield?
I think maybe a little bit. I like I said, I'm not super hot on Untilted. It's good. It's just sort of maybe not for me. It's hard for me to say that it's in the shadow of Confield, because I think even if Confield didn't exist, I'd feel the same way about it. But yeah, I don't know. It just sort of like, I do sort of think that the grouping those all together as this middle period, like I've done and like we've done, is a little unfair. It just sort of feels like you have to do it, to talk about it maybe.
Yeah, I guess for some reason it's weird because it does feel like this is kind of the middle period, and it just feels like Untilted has like very little to do with Draft or Chorustus, right? Mm-hmm. And Chorustus has like very little to do with Untilted. It just feels like each of the albums in this period is sort of like a completely different thing. Draft is disappointing because it feels like half it's trying to like continue doing the Confield thing, and half it's like totally reeling back from that, like going back into maybe LP5 territory or something.
Yeah.
Or EP7 territory a little bit. But it's like, that's why to me it's unsuccessful. But it's like, for some reason, I want to group all of these records together because they have so little to do with each other, is maybe how I feel. You brought up something I actually wanted to get to. We got an email from listener Rob who said, "Thanks for turning me on to Untitled 15 years later, straight to my top 4 Autechre LPs. Love to hear that. Really distinctive," he says. "Knowing there is one outstanding LP and that gap between Confield and XI really lifts the whole corpus for me, takes my admiration for these guys up yet another notch." I was kind of curious to get your take on this, because for me, like, Draft is the one misstep, but because you aren't so hot on Draft or Untilted, do you feel like, the sort of the middle of their career is like a little bit of a slump, like a larger slump? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I sort of do. And I, before doing this podcast, I would have said that it was, very clearly the slump. But digging into it, I said that I really came to love Choristus and, the whole extended universe of Choristus, which I think, took it out of that slump a bit. But, Draft feels like a slump record to me, for what you just said. It's the first album that feels like they're not taking some, big step. It kind of feels like either just a continuation of Confield mixed with, a little back step into the LP5 kind of thing. Untilted, I don't feel the same about. I understand that record. It's just I always want to say, it's just sort of not for me. It's not the kind of electronic music I want to hear. But I don't feel that it's a a step back like I do with Draft. So I would kind of say that it's easy to group that middle period as a slump, but then again, if you put Confield in that, I like Confield a lot, and I put it fairly high on our rankings that we've been doing. So it's hard to say it's a slump, but I mean the thing is Autechre as a whole, they don't have any awful albums, from all the records of their whole thing. I think the lowest score I'd give any of them is pretty high. And so, when you say it's a slump, it's not, it's that wasn't a 10, it was only an 8, kind of thing. It's being a little nitpicky.
Yeah. Well, here's a related email from listener Alex who says, "Surprised to hear Confield through Untilted being characterized as a sort of dark ages middle period. In my conception, Confield has always towered as the definitive AE record, with Untilted as its sort of more accessible companion piece. Only Draft fits the dark ages characterization for me. I confess I'd never made it through the whole thing until this podcast." Yeah, I mean, it's just funny because it does feel like there's just something so weird about Confield that it feels like this hard break from everything they had done before. Mm-hmm. And then there seems to be a lot of searching afterwards of that's why they're so different. Let's try this totally different thing. Let's try this totally different thing. It's like Confield has this weird, very disruptive effect, I think, in their discography, which is I love Untilted. I love Choristus, as we've seen, but there's something about them not exactly, it's just seeming a little bit lost, in just trying lots of different things, and some for better, some for worse.
No, exactly. I mean, I think what you just said is perfect. The Confield is that sort of clean break. I think, moving from Incunabula to Amber, Trirepete, those records are different from each other, but it still sounds the same kind of group. You can see where those all came from the same people. Confield, I think really is a big, turn, they're really turning the corner and becoming something else. And I think, Draft especially shows that maybe it got them a little, I don't want to say lost, but it's just sort of maybe they felt like they had to do a clean break every time now, or what, it's hard to say. To what he said about the dark ages sort of thing, the only record I would consider a dark ages, and even then I don't think it's horrible or unlistenable or anything, is Draft. I mean, really my chief complaint with it is that it's not groundbreaking like the rest of, if Confield didn't exist, I think Draft would be pretty good. It's just it's just disappointing in an artistic sense, I feel like.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment, actually, that you said about, they do seem to, feel like they need to make a clean break every time for a little bit. And it's actually, to me, really refreshing. I mean, I love Untilted, but I like I like that they decided to stick with that and build off of it for Chorustus. Instead of like, let's totally switch it up.
It sort of feels like, and maybe that's a good reason not to put Chorustus in that middle period, because it does sort of seem like that's the time when they, make this decision. Like, we don't have to be, we don't have to make this, 180 degree turn every record. We could sort of take the building blocks of the previous thing and build on it, which I think is what like they did before Confield, and
in the 2010s is like
exactly
that is the thing.
No, exactly. And I think that's like an okay. I think that's what like
I love it.
Normal people do.
Yeah. Here's another just quick, intriguing comment from Alex, who says, it's always weird to hear y'all call them songs. To me, they're tracks, which feels closer to capturing the weird manufactured quality the AE excels at so much. What do you think? Is it weird to call them songs?
I always sort of do think about that, like with, experimental music in general. I tend to like refer to like experimental music as like pieces, sort of like classical music sort of thing. Cause I think like the word song does sort of imply like a pop music kind of thing, like a popular, kind of thing. But also, potato, you're just sort of also, does anyone actually say potato? I've never heard anybody say that.
No, but nobody does. I don't know where
yeah, that's a stupid comment, but tracks, I understand what he means by tracks, because honestly, electronic music, I think the word tracks is probably better, but I just sort of use it probably interchangeably.
It's probably problematic. It's probably like a rockist attitude, but there's something about the word songs that feels like dismissive, like it is small and disposable.
It does, it seems disposable. That's exactly.
But that's not true, right? Like we know that's not true about pop music. Anyway, all right, what's the next one?
All right, listener Daniel, which is not me. What are your guys' thoughts on Scruffy's ratings on Autechre releases? His highest ratings are an 8/10 for Incunabula and an 8 out of 10 for Chiastic Slide, with his lowest ratings being a 4.5 out of 10 for Sign. I know he's a contentious and controversial figure in the music world, but sometimes I'm fascinated by his thoughts on discographies that I enjoy.
I, too, am fascinated by him sometimes. I mean, what I like about him is that he, his whole project is like the history of music or something. And it's like, what he's interested in is like, does this change music, or like, does it, change the world? Like not every great album has to change the world, I think. But if that's your standard, then that's kind of an interesting and new way to rate music. He also has a tendency to choose like pretty left field picks. It'll be like some iconic artist, and it's like a pretty weird choice of the album that he picks as like their greatest contribution to the world of music. But on that note, I mean, the problem with him is that he seems to think that every artist has like one great contribution to make, and it's very rare that more than one album gets like a pretty solid rating. I mean, it's surprising that he gives both Incunabula and again, one of those weird picks, Chiastic Slide, the two highest ratings here. But you know what I mean? So it's like, you got to take it with a grain of salt. It's nice to listen to like the weird left ball. If you had not given Chiastic Slide serious treatment and then you were reading Scruffy, you might be like, hey, maybe I ought to check that out. And he would be right. That's an amazing album. But you know what I mean? The problem is that he thinks that artists can't really do it more than once or twice.
Yeah, I don't really like him that much, I'll read some of the stuff every now and then, and like, back in the day when I used to hang out on Mew and stuff, he would come up and I would read it and stuff, but he just sort of feels like a contrarian and like an asshole, frankly, because like you said, I wish I had an example off the top of my head, but he's not going to pick, frequently he won't pick the most famous album or like, right. with the Beatles or something. And I might be wrong, but I bet Sgt. Pepper isn't his highest one, or even Revolver. So, it's probably fucking.
I think
it's probably Meet the Beatles or something. You know?
Like, I think he quite famously shits all over the Beatles as a rule. Which that's classic contrarian right there.
Exactly.
And it's annoying, but sometimes you like a contrarian because
it is.
They do make you listen to something you otherwise wouldn't have.
I mean, he has some viewpoints that are worth hearing every now and then, because you're right. I mean, with his Autechre ratings, I think like Chiastic Slide is a great album, and it is one that sort of kind of gets thrown to the wayside sometimes. So it is nice, like maybe somebody will discover Chiastic Slide because of this contrarian view. But I just think overall he's sort of annoying.
All right. Well, listener Steve wrote us a fantastically long and detailed email with a theory on why AE pushed everything so hard in terms of the angular dissonance of Confield melodies through the bonkers beats on Draft and Untilted, which I'll try to summarize. Essentially, Steve suggests that the way IDM was blowing up in the early aughts was a bit irksome to AE, and that they were kind of trying to throw copycats like Radiohead off their trail and to reintroduce this kind of fuck you punk attitude to the genre, or to restore that fearless experimental edge. I mean, I feel like this is an interesting point, because we kept talking about this, how like Autechre's influence was becoming very felt and everywhere, and how hard it is to keep moving. Do you think anything about like the kind of wild bonkers quality of some of the records in this period are like a deliberate, try copying that, Radiohead?
Kind of not, maybe this is just my own, feelings about them, but like Sean and Rob kind of seem like nice, cool guys. They don't really seem like dickheads that much. Because like there's the famous like Autechre twin who does seem like a dickhead.
Right.
Like saying he hates Radiohead or something, after Kid A or whatever. Right. They just seem like maybe they're like, oh, people are catching up. We gotta step our game up or something. I don't think it's like a fuck you Radiohead kind of thing. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but they just don't seem like that.
I do get a little sense, because we talked about this, like with I'm totally like adding this myself. This is just my headcanon, but I just feel like there's a little rivalry going on between like Aphex Twin and Autechre specifically, and that they are kind of challenging each other sometimes, like top that.
What was what they call the going back and forth with the
Tricks War.
A Tricks War. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, not totally serious, but I do feel like there was a little friendly competition in the IDM world.
Definitely.
And so they may have felt that about people like Bjork or Radiohead or whatever the case is. It's possible. What's next?
All right, yeah. Listener Steve, which is a different Steve, if Autechre hadn't already proved themselves in the 90s and acquired an audience in a well-known record label pushing them, would anyone listen to any of the AE releases of the last 20 years? Or would they listen to them more than once? If any of these records, Confield, Draft 730, Untilted, etc., were the first release of a new artist or maybe a self-release on Bandcamp, I doubt the records would have the following that they do.
Yeah, this is interesting because it is impossible, I think, to conceive of a world where Autechre never existed, like, because their influence, I think, is so massive on people like Radiohead and Bjork. And, like, I've been thinking a lot about like Sophie, right, who just passed away, like, I mean, so sadly, but she was obviously a huge Autechre fan. It's like it's so tragic for some reason, just as me as an Autechre fan, that like, it's clear that, that Autechre remix just came out recently, and she must have been so thrilled about that. And then, oh my God. But anyway, like, I mean, her influence on the hyperpop genre is immense, and she's clearly like so inspired by Autechre. So it's just like, I can't even conceive of a world of popular music without Autechre's fingerprints on it to then guess what would people think about this music coming out now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. I think Autechre is really one of those sort of things that, they do like sort of have their fingers on so many things, but it's not like overtly so. It's drifted down through like more popular artists, like Radiohead or something. I think your average person who just likes Radiohead because they heard it on the radio or whatever doesn't know about Autechre, but the influence is still there and stuff. I think like what he said, like if this was if Confield was somebody on Bandcamp's first record, I think it probably would just get lost, basically because there is like a deluge of like records that get released every day on Bandcamp, and I'm sure, and sometimes at like bothers me that I'm sure there are like some of the best records I've ever, that you could ever hear that you'll just never hear because it's just some guy made it in his bedroom and he doesn't have anybody, pushing it and nobody listens to it. And so it never gets discovered. I think that, without a label and stuff, like, I think it would definitely be harder for them and everything, to not. I think too what he's saying, like having that grounding of like some those 90s records that were like big kind of gives like the experimental stuff, maybe a bigger audience than it would have had, if they started there. It's true, but I mean, I don't think it speaks to like the quality of Autechre at all. I think it's it's not like I don't like Confield just because they made Try Repete. Like it's just I probably heard Confield because they got famous, because of.
Well, I mean, that's just the case. Is like they were so hugely influential in the '90s that like now they can coast. Like we were just saying, like now they can just do their own thing. They can explore, and they've got like this solid fan base that's always going to listen to everything they do. And they just so happen to be like constantly making great new material and like pushing forward. But they do seem to like establish their reputation, and other fans are going to be with them forever. But it's just like I would have to imagine a world where like Kid A doesn't exist, and where Homogenic doesn't exist, and like maybe Sophie doesn't exist, and then maybe if I did hear Confield today, I would be like, "Holy fucking shit!"
No, exactly.
So who knows? Let's see. Steve also writes, with respect to a user comment about speaking about history for each release, you guys talked about U.S. politics or U.S. news and U.S. Billboard top hits, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Major events that happened in England would be more pertinent to Autechre. They are not a U.S. act. Yeah, that's true. Fair enough. But I feel like, one, I was trying to kind of just pick a few like big world events as a whole. But two, I think we were mostly just testing it to show that it might not make even any sense at all to talk about cultural context that much.
Yeah, I think we were, as the Brits say, I think we were just kind of taking the piss a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, we were being sort of U.S. centric, I guess. But I mean, that's where I live, so.
Yeah, I don't know that much about English culture in the 90s or like what was going on. But if anybody wants to write in with that stuff that they were thinking about that was influencing the way they were listening to these records, I would love to hear it. Steve also gave us some detailed breakdowns of major developments in electronic music and music distribution. I just sort of copied the list into our little doc here, and I wonder if anything comes to mind looking at it. But I feel like these are the kind of things we actually do talk about, which is like, the CD era, the digital era, like the portable era, the Spotify era we're going to start talking about now. These are certainly important because they are really first and foremost, I think, a lot of times on Autechre's mind.
Yeah, I mean, Autechre like clearly is like and I think all electronic music, you like when you're using technology to make music, you sort of like have to be in the forefront of technology, like as it progresses and stuff. It would be weird if Autechre was stuck in the past kind of thing. Resisting Spotify or resisting, Bandcamp kind of digital releases. So I think, they always like, I mean, we talked about it with some of the, Choristus and everything. Like they really are like kind of pushing the format with everything. I mean, right. I think LSEC is like really one of the first releases where people said, the length no longer matters, like right, that why be bound to that, any longer at all. And I think Autechre, again, is very much at the forefront of a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I liked getting this breakdown, but that's stuff that I do feel like we've been talking about and that we will continue to talk about. What's next? A lot of emails here. This is what happens when we skip a listener email episode.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, listener Jordan, he says, I've been thinking about how good Try Repete works as a teacher for making electronic music because of how straightforward the approach of the album is. It is an album that shows you how creative you can be with the simple ideas and how simple music doesn't have to sound boring. It is an album that is repetitive, but it shows you how to be creative within that repetition. The tracks are just loops with parameters that change over time. Even the album title sounds like it's telling you to have a go yourself by saying, try repeating this. That's good. I never thought of that. And, and listening to it makes me want to. It is a good album to ease someone into making electronic music and makes it easier for new people to understand basic concepts and making the craft more approachable. I can see how the album can be influential to electronic musicians, even if they want to make something that is sonically different.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing point, actually. First off, I never thought of the album title in that way, which is great. But also, I remember feeling kind of inspired in this way when I first listened to it, because it's like, yeah, just start with one loop, right? And just start adding to it. Like, it's almost like teaches you how to make like electronic music and how to make music out of repetition and simplicity. And, you know, I remember like messing around with this stuff as soon as I heard like this album in particular. It was just like, all right, I don't have to like construct some like, you know, intricate like crystal globe like Aphex Twin does or Boards of Canada or something. Like, I'll just start with one sound, one loop that's interesting. I'll add a new one to it. I'll add a new one to it. And it's like, not everybody's going to do it with the talent that Autechre does, but it might explain why this album is so influential, that it sort of teaches you how to make music.
No, I mean, exactly. I mean, I you know, bootlegged Fruity Loops around the time, you know, I heard Try Repete, and I'd made some really, you know, shitty electronic music that was definitely like I felt inspired by, you know, that record and stuff. And I mean, even today, like the stuff I make and stuff, I'm constantly inspired by that Autechre thing of just repeating thing. You know, the whole, you know, minimalism and everything of it is, you know, definitely inspiring.
All right. Well, lastly, we've gotten a lot of emails over the whole course of the show, actually, asking us to talk about Autechre's collaborations with the Hafler Trio. And we're definitely gonna, but what is this new rumor about a box set, Dan?
Yeah, I posted it on our Twitter if anyone wants to check it out. But it seems like and it's also on the Autechre subreddit. But it seems like this record label is going to re-release all the Autechre Hafler Trio releases before, but on vinyl over 7 discs. So that should be cool if that actually comes out. It said March of 2021. So if that's legitimate, that'll be cool. Hopefully it makes those releases more accessible. In means of finding it, because those aren't on Spotify, and one of them is like a DVD. So it's hard to. It's kind of hard to. I mean, you could download it places, but you know, it's nowhere. I don't think you can like legitimately, you know, buy those anywhere anymore. Like I don't think you know, even the digital downloads or anything. Yeah, well, I mean, that would be like really exciting and cool. But we will talk about the Autechre's collaborative work after we get through the main discography. We'll talk about GONKCAST. We'll talk about remixes. We're going to talk about everything that so many of you have been requesting. But all right, we made it through the emails. All right. Well, if you've got any Autechre opinions or hot takes to share, we want to hear them. Email us, gonkcastpod@gmail.com. Next episode, less than a week, we're going Oversteps and Move of 10. Again, send us your thoughts on those. gonkcastpod@gmail.com. If you like the show, help us out, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Look us up, YouTube. Stay connected on Twitter, Instagram. Those are @GONKCastPod. And we'll see you next time. See ya.